Welcome back to, well, probably the most special episode of Supreme Myths that I've recorded to date. I'll explain why in a minute. We are taping this on a Tuesday in the middle of June, and in the next 2 weeks, the Supreme Court is going to issue decisions on guns, two of them, abortion, two of them, free speech and social media, a huge case, Trump immunity, and a whole bunch of other things. And of course, this podcast is going to be devoted to covering that over the next month, and we will do that. But I wanted a break. I think we all need a break a little bit. So I thought I would take the opportunity right before the hurricane hits to bring onto my podcast a very articulate and smart, if I say so myself, 16-year-old teenager who also happens to be my daughter. Her name is Sara Segall. She is politically active, and I'm interested in, and I'm thinking some of my audience might be interested in, what's it like to be a teenager in America in 2024, given COVID, given post-COVID, given the internet, given Trump, and everything else. Sara, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Dad. I'm excited to be here.
I'm glad you're here. So we're going to start off on a depressing note. Again, we're taping this Tuesday at 5 o'clock, and a few hours ago, there was a shooting where at least 4 people have been injured at a place called Peachtree Center, which is a food court that is literally 2 blocks from where I work and where I have lunch on average 1 to 2 days a week. Thank goodness not today. This is a very serious matter. 4 people have been injured. We don't know the extent of the damage. This is a very popular food court right in downtown Atlanta. There are 420 million guns in America. I've covered this issue a lot on this podcast, and I'm just curious, Sara, what, from a teenager's perspective, a teenager who does not have guns in the house, which probably makes you unusual, how do people, you first and then your friends, think about guns, think about the problem of gun violence? Is it something you think about like on a daily basis?
Yes, definitely. Guns have a really big impact on the way I am able to spend my time. I actually can't go into local malls after 3 o'clock without an adult. So that's kind of this very key teenage experience, going to malls with your friends. And I can't do that because that mall was shut up. I've been in school lockdowns because of shootings in nearby areas, not anything at my school or directly near my school, thank God, but things close enough where my school had to go into lockdown for hours on end. I think about guns in the places I'm going, and it definitely is something that I'm thinking about a lot, apolitically as well as politically.
So I have a question about that. So when I was your age, maybe a little bit younger, and the baby boomers in my audience, and there were many, will remember this, we were told to go out in the hallway, put our hands across our heads, lean against the wall in case of a nuclear bomb. I'm talking about the early mid-'60s here, or we would hide under our desks, which was really stupid. And I remember as a kid thinking, even as a 7, 8, 9-year-old, well, if there's a nuclear bomb, then we're not going to survive this hiding under. But the reality was, we didn't really think there was going to be a nuclear bomb. You guys do drills in case of active shooters, right?
Yeah.
I find that incredibly sad. How do you feel about that?
I think it is incredibly tragic, and it is a really sad representation of the world we live in, that our schools are being impacted by this problem. Now, I'm fortunate enough to have grown up going to private schools, which definitely experience this less, at least as far as I know. So I haven't really known anyone directly to have experienced a school shooting, and I've been lucky enough not to experience one myself. But I do have public school friends who have told me about their experiences where their peers will bring a gun to school or lie about bringing a gun to school, and there's a full lockdown. And that happens pretty regularly. And yeah, we definitely do a lot of practices. I've been probably doing these practices since about 4th grade, and maybe I was doing them younger, but they didn't want to explain explicitly what was going on to shield us. But yeah.
Does it strike you as, this is the last question about guns, does it strike you as kind of surreal that there are more, this is a loaded question, there are more guns in America than people, and I'm pretty sure we're the only country in the world where that's true. Do you have any thoughts how we can change that?
Change that? Honestly, I'm not sure. I think that guns are definitely being used as a political symbol of freedom by the far right, and I'm worried that too extreme actions to take that away will be viewed as taken to a much more extreme and be used against the left. but I think that just got really strict gun regulations. But I also think taking a look at our education and our like schools to prison pipelines and thinking, why are there students shooting their schools up? Why are there people who are engaging in these mass shootings? Why is that? Um, with the issue of access to guns, but also like what people are doing with them and how that's so normalized. It honestly feels dystopian.
It does feel dystopian, and I just feel terrible for our entire generations of people who have to live. This was not an issue for me growing up. We didn't have school shootings. We were worried about missiles coming out of the sky, except not really. We really weren't worried about that. Okay, let's move on to something else. This is a very poorly phrased question, but I want to ask it anyway. So I'm curious what and you can speak for your friends if you know their views. What does privacy mean to you? How important is privacy given the internet world?
I think with social media, there's very little of it. But kind of taking a step back from social media, I think as a teenager, being given the autonomy, like within reason from my parents to make my own decisions and spend my own time in the way that is productive for me and makes me happy is really important. And I definitely think as much as it is intuitive for parents to look through their teenagers' phones, I think to an extent that they are functional and existing safely, it's really important for teenagers to have privacy on their phones with their messages with their friends, with maybe an online journaling app that they have, with kind of the music they listen to, anything like that. I think that it can feel very invasive, or at least for a lot of my peers, what they've told me about when their parents kind of over insert themselves into that.
Well, hold on. Let me ask you about that. So in our family, I will say this to the world. It's not a secret. What we have said is we reserve the right to look at your phone at any moment, at any time. We actually don't do it almost ever. We have occasionally, but we reserve the right to. And I think we will reserve that right until you're 18. What you just said, do you think it's wrong? And we can speak openly here. Do you think it's wrong for us to? I mean, our main reason for doing that is deterrence. Although Mom and I are both understand if you wanted to hide something from us, given our limited technological abilities, you probably could. But nevertheless, do you think it's a mistake for parents to be worried? I mean, we can't help but worry about this.
I'm not talking about in situations of extremes when you're worried about your child's mental health or they are suddenly doing really poorly in school when they were previously doing well. But I think like I have friends whose parents will kind of just randomly go through their messages with their friends or will just like start scrolling through their phones. And I think that without a valid reason, it can feel a lot of times very invasive. And I think that one thing I appreciate about you and Mom is that you guys aren't going to do that unless you have a reason that makes sense. And I'd like to think that we have that trust with you guys to back that up. Now, if a kid doesn't have that trust, I think it's a different situation. But for your average high functional, successful teenager with a good social life who's making healthy decisions, I don't think that it's necessary for parents to kind of sporadically go through their phone.
Okay. Related question. So you're at dinner with two of your closest friends, and you can't find something in your phone that you want to find. That's probably even a stupid statement. But let's just pretend you can't find something in your phone, but you don't know how to find it or something. If you give your phone to a friend and say, "Can you help me with this?" What expectation of private, would you be upset if you left? How private is your phone to you vis-a-vis your friends?
That's not really a situation that realistically would happen, but like as a way to get to what you're talking about, if I'm showing my friend a
Thanks
photo,
for the help there, Sarah.
sorry, but if I have like a picture on my phone from my camera roll and I'm showing my friend this one specific picture or a TikTok or a piece of media and they start scrolling through and viewing other things, that is like a very big violation of my privacy. That's kind of an unwritten rule. You don't do that. If I'm showing someone a text and they start scrolling through the whole conversation without permission, that is a violation of privacy. And I think all of that kind of goes unspoken with teenagers.
So I'm going to tell the audience what's happening in real time now. You and I are having this great conversation that I'm enjoying. I don't know if they're enjoying it. And I have three daughters. Sarah is 16. Kai is 15. And my oldest daughter, Jessie, is 33. And Jessie is texting me. And I have no doubt she's texting me because she heard about the shooting where she knows I have lunch. So I'm going to do this in real time. This is the problem with guns in America right here. That every minute we're worried that someone we love is in danger. So I am just saying, telling Jesse I'm okay in real time, and that'll take care of that. It's sad I have to do that. If we weren't living in this world, I'd wait an hour and tell Jesse later I'm fine. But I know that she's worried. Okay, going back. Do you have any soul in the universe, including your sisters, your friends, your parents, anybody? You had a boyfriend for a year, a little over a year, him, anybody, who you would give your phone and say, look, anything you want, I don't care.
Well, I have certain things on my phone that I keep locked for either security reasons or privacy. Usually it's my journaling stuff, or anything that's just like not necessarily harmful, but just particularly personal. So with the assumption that I have like safety measures where necessary, um, honestly, probably not. I probably would have given my ex-boyfriend my phone if he had really asked for it, but I would have questioned where in the lack of trust made him ask for that. I think that anybody who wanted it that badly, clearly like there's a bigger issue going on. I don't really think it's
Sure.
necessary, and I wouldn't ask that from anybody else.
I guess I didn't even, I like that answer. I didn't even mean it that way. I meant, um, is it something you want to share? The content. I mean, because we're all walking around with our entire lives in our pockets. And we've been doing it only for about what, 10 years? I don't know the exact number, 15 years, whatever. It's a very bizarre thing. But that's the only world you've known. I mean, at one point you were too young to have a phone. But once COVID hit and you got a phone, your entire life, pretty much, right? All banking, our stuff, how we send you money, your text messages, everything. It's all right there. If you lost it, now, I know you have a lock on it. I know you can decode all that stuff. But someone more talented than you could certainly pry open probably pretty much anything they wanted to from your phone. How worried would you be if you lost your phone? Not in terms of you need your phone to live, but the contents of the phone revealing to other people things you don't want it to reveal.
I think the main thing would actually be more for my friends' privacy, because I have confidential information from them about their personal
Right.
lives in our texts.
Right.
So I think
Right.
like as much as I would hate to have like details of my personal life exposed, I'm not really hiding anything when I think about it. Like there's stuff that's personal, but there's nothing that could like have actually negative impact on me. But that doesn't mean that my friends haven't confided in me things that they wouldn't want to be shared. And I think that honestly would probably trump like my own privacy and my own feelings about that.
Okay. If you had to name one or two of the most difficult issues, I'm not talking about political necessarily, but just getting through the day, teenager getting through the day, getting through school, what are some of the really difficult things you think teenagers in America in 2024? Now, of course, teenagers in Oklahoma in a public school, very different than an urban private school in Atlanta, but there are commonalities, I think, across, age groups. What are some of the biggest issues that you think technology has made you have to deal with that I probably didn't have to deal with?
Oh, so technology specifically. I think for teenage girls, body image and views on their own appearances. Now, women have hated the way they look from the beginning of time because of patriarchy that exists and that isn't new. But the way social media and the way that people act because of social media exasperate it. And now I'm actually not talking about the really, really beautiful influencers who you see scrolling. Those have an impact, but at least for me, I've definitely internalized they aren't really real. They have filters, they're photoshopping. Even if they are, that's a one in the million person who I just happen to be seeing more often. But social media changes the way people think about the value of appearance. A woman can be posting almost any content, and generally on TikTok will not get a platform or views unless she is also a certain level of appearance, or the joke is her appearance like being below that threshold. I think that social media really makes girls and women internalize the importance of beauty, regardless of where you fall on that line. And I think it makes people feel that it's just like the number one factor in everything. You can have everything in the world, but if you aren't beautiful, it doesn't matter. And I think social media makes that a lot worse because the beauty on social media is a currency. That's how that works. That's how you get traction, success, views. Even with like girls and teenagers and your friends post looking really beautiful in an Instagram post, that is social currency. That is how you make friends. It's not your personality. It's how many comments you get. And generally that is because of how you look.
I love this idea, Sarah, and you and we talk all the time, obviously. I've never heard you use this phrase, social currency. Can you flesh that out a little bit? What do you mean by social currency?
I mean, I think that people, specifically women who are beautiful, get treated better. And it's a social currency. I mean, you can use the way you look to get into places, to get invited to parties. A lot of times I'll see invitations to parties and it's like girls get in free, but they don't mean all girls. They mean the girls who are really beautiful. If you want to be part of a friend group, a lot of times the cliques are the most beautiful people, and those are the people who are going to functions. They are planning things. They are kind of getting like the most social attention. And I think more than ever, if you're not really, really beautiful, especially as a teenage girl, you're going to have negative like there are going to be negative impacts of that, and you feel that very closely. Right.
Do you think this is going to be a hard question, but I'm confident if you can either handle it or if you can say you can't handle it. That obviously that's true somewhat for men, obvious for boys, obviously less, but it is true. And so obviously a very, very good looking 16-year-old, 6'2" blonde hair, blue eyed, or whatever your definition of good looks is, boy is going to have an easier time in life than a very overweight 5'5" not good looking person. Okay. As a general proposition. Sarah, is that a difference in degree or difference in kind, do you think?
Biologically, for any animal, if you want to have the best mating opportunities, you're going to be like the most attractive to that. That's always going to exist for any species, for humans.
No. Sarah, at the beginning, I think strength. You have to get the food from the caves. You want to.
Right. But I mean, there are features that are biologically attractive that are like, there are features that are biologically attractive. But I think that the complete sexualization of women has made a female appearance valued so much higher than males to a point where I think it's a different kind. I mean, people want to be attractive. Men would like to be attractive. But I mean, if you look at like statistics, fat women do so much worse career-wise than fat men. And there are a ton, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but there are all these statistics. Being unattractive as a woman is going to harm you so much worse than being unattractive as a man, especially in like school or a career opportunity, and stuff like that.
And certainly we have male actors like Harrison Ford, Tom Cruise is like 60 something years old, yet can play sex symbols, or often are in movies married to women 30 years younger. And that almost never happens with female actresses. They can find roles, but not the leading roles. They have to become sidekicks and they have to become mothers and they have to, right? And that's seriously unfair, I think. Okay, that's interesting. So you go to a very progressive private school. It's one of the most progressive private schools probably in the Southeast. So it's a little bit of a fake environment, but you do hang out with people from public schools and other places. And I'm curious, if you said what you just said about looks to the typical 16-year-old boy in your grade, the median, the average, would they say, well, that's obviously right? Would they say, oh, you're blowing it up out of proportion? Would they say that's wrong? What would they say, do you think?
I think that it's very easy for teenage boys to not see the broader nuances of the impacts appearance can have on a teenage girl. I think that I think they'd probably say, you know what, maybe that's true, but that feels exaggerated, that I don't think it actually matters that much. Like, I don't care that much. I don't think they would see it as a fully nuanced, complicated issue. I think they would take it at a much more surface level place.
That's a great answer. Okay. Let's move on to LGBTQ, whatever other letters there are. And people should know, and I've joked about this on this podcast before and in my classes, that I get corrected by my two daughters all the time, my two younger daughters all the time, for politically correct mistakes. If I make any of those, feel free to step in and correct me, as you always do at dinner anyway. Okay. Do you have any homophobic friends who are truly homophobic, who would say, that should be illegal?
I do not have any friends who would say that homosexuality should be illegal, but I have a friend, right. But I have a friend who truly, truly, to his core, thinks that engaging in homosexual activity is a sin. He thinks that if people feel those feelings and are gay, that they should just abstain. He is very deeply Catholic, but he holds, and the reason I'm able to kind of move past that and maintain a friendship with him is because he doesn't think it has any place in our legal system. He doesn't think that the government should be making any laws about marriage or homosexual activity. He thinks that what happens between two consenting adults in the privacy of their bedroom is completely legal under the law and shouldn't be infringed on by the government. And he has respect for gay people. And he kind of just follows the religious pathway of like they've lost their way. But he never puts that judgment on anybody else. And I've been able to argue with him about this. We've debated about it. If I can change his mind, I will. He thinks if he can change my mind, he will, although he won't. And we have a pretty good friendship, but only because of that very keen nuance of respect. I don't think I'd be able to have a close friendship with someone who truly thought that being gay should be illegal, who thought that like being gay is I just don't think I could do that.
So his objection comes from his faith, and you're willing to say, all right, we really disagree about this, but as long as you don't impose it on me or others, you're okay with it. If he said, I want to vote for a law, so Georgia had a law that was interpreted to prohibit gay sex, and the Supreme Court upheld it, and then reversed itself 20 years later. He would not be in favor of a law prohibiting gay sex, and if he was in favor of that, you would have a much harder time being his friend.
Yeah, I'd have to think about that a long time.
Sure. Okay. Um, do do gay couples at your school walk around openly, holding hands and doing whatever? I know public. So for the audience, I've learned over the last couple of years that public displays of affection, at least in this region of the country, among Sarah and Kai's, my youngest age groups, is not something that people like very much. But to the extent public displays of affection exist at your school and in your social circles, could two men or two boys or two girls do that? And people go, who cares?
Yeah, but I actually think that who cares would go even a little too far. I think that there are a lot of people who, especially with two girls dating, wouldn't fully take it seriously, and I think would kind of mentally still view them as just friends. Unless there was like really excessive PDA, which obviously like would change things. But I think that something I've noticed in the past few years is like almost a social regression. Like I think that people aren't necessarily taking gay people seriously fully, even if it's not a negative attention. It's rather no attention in a bad way.
Oh, that's interesting. So you're saying that maybe two girls walk down the hall or two. Well, I think my instinct, Sarah, tells me there's a big difference between two girls walking down the hall who everyone knows is in a romantic relationship, holding hands, and two boys walking down the hall. Am I wrong about that?
I think that
Not from your perspective. I mean, the average perspective.
no, yeah. I think that two boys walking down the hall would be much less likely to happen, and I think that's because, well, there's a lot of sexualization of lesbianism, but also just men aren't generally permitted to show like attraction to other men in a platonic way, and I think that that goes above and beyond that with gay male couples. I think it's not that there's more judgment. I think in my school they'd probably be taken way more seriously, but I'm guessing in like a public school there would definitely be social repercussions of two men, while two girls would kind of not be thought about at all.
And so you just finished your 10th grade and you're going into 11th grade, your junior year. So you've been in high school for 2 years now. Are there trans folks walking around openly trans?
So yes and no. Um, I think that the world, or at least my world during COVID, kind of experienced something a little weird with trans people. I think it definitely was, it grew in, people grew in awareness very, very, very quickly. And I think a lot of young people identified as trans at a point where maybe they didn't fully knew how they felt about themselves or for any other reasons. And that is not to invalidate any trans people whatsoever. I think that there are so many people who, where those feelings are completely rooted in genuine transness. They are born in a body that they are not. Um, but I also think you kind of have to be honest and look at all of the people and the teenagers who identified as trans and then don't anymore. And I think because of that, it really is harder for like the actual trans people now to kind of go through life because they also aren't really taken seriously. I know one person who is a trans male. He uses he, him pronouns, but was born in a female body. And definitely he doesn't get backlash for it. But I also think he isn't fully taken seriously, even though he has been out for 4 years. Teachers still use she, her. He has been using he, him for 4 years. Like it's gone to the point where it's been long enough where people kind of should have maybe accepted that and still haven't. But also, I can't testify to how much worse that would be in other environments.
One other trans issue, and you and I have talked about this kind of off air, as it were, quite a bit in our lives. But I think our discussions have been rich, so I want to bring them to this podcast. The issue, and the other thing is, my minor digression. My Twitter feed is often looked at, and my tweets are occasionally retweeted by Martina Navratilova. For the people in the audience who don't know who that is, you should know who she is. She's probably the second, third, or fourth greatest women's tennis player of all time. When I was growing up, she was the greatest women's tennis player. She was openly gay, one of the first openly gay female athletes. She is notoriously anti-trans. So when she retweets my stuff, I get in trouble from the communities because the trans community just hates her. I don't want to get into that discussion. I do want to get into discussion, though, about trans athletes, because that's something that she is very, very big on. And you and I have had good discussions about. So let me just give a hypothetical. I'm a law professor. I get to do that. You're used to them at dinner time and things like that. So here's my hypothetical. Your family that has always been into swimming, and of course, actually, your mother's family has always been into swimming, and your aunt is a nationally known swimmer. Um, and trained from day one, worked hard, the goal of getting a college scholarship in swimming. And you go to a high school and you're on the swim team and you do great. And the real good colleges, the Stanfords, the Georgias are looking at you. But at the end of the day, there is a trans, I don't know, I'm sorry, trans boy.
Trans woman.
Thank you, sir. A trans woman who is 6'2", 210 pounds, which for swimming is probably not even that big an advantage, but is bigger and more muscular than 95% of the girls they're going to compete against. Is it fair for that person to take that scholarship from that person? And I deliberately set this up in a very, obviously one-sided way on purpose.
Yeah. I think it's definitely complicated, but I also think to an extent people kind of take this issue of trans people in sports as a microcosm, and I just don't think it is a microcosm of trans issues. I think people, sorry, this isn't really addressing that, but kind of going
That's okay.
on that. I think that people a lot of times all they think about when they bring up trans issues is sports, trans people in sports, trans people in sports. I think that's such a small like issue in the grand scheme of things. And I am not transgender, although I have friends who are, and yeah, and I'm like definitely an ally 100%. I think that I would almost say take sports out of the issue. Say no to trans people and give them equality on every other front. Give them the rights to surgery. Give them full protection under the law. Give them equality. I honestly would make that trade because I think that the trans and sports issue is something that's latched on so much by the right, and I can't bring myself to think that that's a big enough deal to trump the millions of trans people who aren't in athletics.
Right.
Like, I don't know how I feel about that. I think it's complicated. I think it's nuanced, but I almost think by putting that at the figure at the forefront of trans issues is kind of doing a disservice to a broader group of people who need equality in so many other places. Like the real problem with trans people isn't that they can't play sports, it's that they're not getting the medical privacy and the medical treatment that they need
for
mental health. Sure. Or equal career opportunities or equal education or anything else.
I do think I think that's fine. You ducked my question. I'll let you duck it. I mean, empathy for the woman who didn't make it, for the girl who didn't make it. But I will say I do think symbols are important. So for social movements, I mean, and you and I have talked before. I think the sports issue is important because of the publicity that goes along with it. Because if you're the number one swimmer in the state and you're a girl, but you somehow don't get to be number one because of a trans woman, that's a problem. So I don't know. I think the issue, I agree with you about numbers. There are very few people this affects today. Those who it affects, though, it affects very deeply. So it's like the disease meningitis. A friend of mine worked on a vaccine for that. Meningitis is very rare. But when it hits, it is terrible, especially the bad kind. So my friend had to convince his drug company to make a vaccine for this, knowing it probably wouldn't be profitable, but it's so disruptive when it hits a family. I think the trans sports issue is kind of similar. You see someone who's worked their whole lives for a goal. And then so the question that comes out of all of that is maybe it has to be completely contextual. Maybe it depends on the sport, the person, how much of an advantage being in quote unquote a genetically at birth male body gives an advantage to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the conclusion I've somewhat come to. Like, it has to be case by case. Not every situation is the same. What if the person is within the outlines of what what a biological woman's realistic height and weight could be? I think it's also rare enough that case by case is possible. And I think that's important to remember.
I agree with that. I don't think we need a one size fits all rule here. Maybe we do. I'm not sure about that, but I think there's a good argument that we probably don't. Okay. You go to a very progressive school. If you're in a politics class or a history class or whatever, strike that. You're at lunchtime and you're having a political conversation and someone says, I think Trump is the best thing that's ever happened. He's going to save our country. What happens to that person?
I think that everybody would start laughing and think that that person was joking.
Okay.
Because the thing is with my school is that even though it is very progressive, there are a lot of Republicans I've come across. But even so, I don't think that I think that a lot of times teenagers, their political opinions are heavily influenced by their parents. And I don't think a lot of Trump supporter parents would send their kids to my school. I think
Oh,
that
that's fair. That's
I
fair.
think that it's like I'm gonna have a biased answer. I think that even though there are kids whose parents are definitely Republican and right leaning, but choose Paideia or my school for whatever reason because of the merits of its education, I don't think that like a true diehard Trump supporter would send their children in this environment. So I don't really know if that would happen. Now I will say if there's someone who's like, look, I would vote for Trump and for XYZ, here's why. And they very clearly like dismissed a lot of Trump stuff. It was solely because of like abortion or whatever. It would still be negatively taken, but it wouldn't be like I don't think they'd be painted as evil by the majority of reasonable, strong critical thinkers who are like aware of themselves. Now also there's it's a high school. There are gonna be people who are take a more surface level approach and will kind of like latch on and villainize them. But I'd like to think that at least the people I choose to surround myself with are open minded enough to like see the nuance behind a lot of politics, even if I think they're like kind of objectively wrong with Trump.
If I did not, so like I do with all my podcasts, I just want to tell the audience I treated Sarah pretty much the same way. I sent a rough list of questions. That I always do that for my guests, and then I tell my guests, but we're going to veer off, improvise, that kind of thing, and we often do. And we stick to the roadmap as much as possible. I didn't tell you I was going to ask you this next question. It's a hard one, but I'm going to ask you anyway. If there was one thing you could say, I'm going to be very specific about this. We live in a progressive city in a red state. We live in a neighborhood that's fairly progressive. So I want you to just stick with, our general milieu. I'm not talking, the answers from someone from rural Oklahoma or that for that matter, downtown Manhattan might be very different than these answers. And of course, we all know that. If there was one thing, we may get to more, but just one thing you could tell older generations, like, change this about the world, do this better. And there are a lot of things we could talk about, of course. Is there one that stands above the rest?
That's a hard question.
I know,
Like
but I warned you ahead of time.
just to older people or like parents, like just older generations in general.
History, like a time, like you're going to put something in a time capsule saying, "I wish you would do this better. Open this in 20 years, and it goddamn better be better."
Yeah. Go out
In
and
America, we're just talking about America, I'm not talking about the world.
get every single person to vote.
Oh, that's interesting. I wasn't expecting that answer. Okay,
Every single person.
over 18.
Well, yeah, of course.
Well, let's talk about that for about 2 minutes. Because I sometimes make my class crazy. Not sometimes. Almost every year I make my class crazy, and I'll admit I'm playing devil's advocate here. Why should someone who can't read, doesn't know anything about politics, has no interest in it, or maybe that sounds pejorative, or maybe is just working so hard to put food on the plate for their family that they don't have time to be informed, and they really don't know. It's like flipping a coin. I don't know who these people are. Why should they get a vote?
Because I think any kind of cutoff on beyond like age restrictions on who can vote is an attack on democracy. And there is who sets that line, who determines that, where does that line fall, where does that line stop being impacted by racism and sexism and prejudice. I mean, that line of reasoning was used to keep women and black people from voting for centuries. I don't think that there's any way to set a line like that without impacting people in completely biased ways. And even if there was, I still think creating any form of subjective line is a hindrance on democracy. Not that we really fully have it anyway, but I think that that's too far.
I think it's a great answer. So as I said, I didn't think I was going to ask you that, and you spent 15 seconds thinking about it, and you gave a great answer. Is every person voting who's eligible to vote more important than doing something about climate change?
Um, I don't. I think climate change is number one, and that seems kind of obvious now that you've said it. But I also think everybody voting would kind of inadvertently help that. I think Biden has donated more money to climate change efforts than any other president, and I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but in like recent history. And I think that, okay, yeah, climate. That's a pretty fair point. I hadn't really thought of it. But I think that voting like for specifically America is up here.
Yeah. Okay. I think your point is well taken. If young people voted a lot more, there'd probably be more votes for things that help alleviate climate change. I do think one difference is if all Americans voted who are eligible, that would just be a good thing. America can't do climate change on its own. Yeah, obviously, we need world cooperation for that. So
True.
that's difficult. All right. This has been great. We're going to do a lightning round, and then we're going to call it a day. I really enjoyed this, Sarah, and I'm really glad you came on. Okay, lightning round. Have you ever read a newspaper?
Like a paper newspaper? Yes, a sleepaway camp.
Okay. I asked that question because, sorry, audience, I'm about to brag. It is obvious my daughter is incredibly articulate and to me intelligent. Yet, other than in the summers once or twice, she's never read a newspaper. Do you ever read newspapers online?
Yeah, I have. Well, yes, I definitely have like news apps on my phone and stuff. A lot of New York Times, and I get notifications. But I also am try to be very aware of the fact that like news is a lot of time Western news is a lot of time biased, and I can't like believe everything that I read like immediately.
Do you think you could date a boy who's very conservative? Or
Um,
girl? Sorry, you date someone who's very conservative.
I think it would depend on what that means. I think it means different things to different people. And I think that only if they had a really baseline level of respect and love for all people and acceptance for all people, and they were willing to work on anti-racism. I think that that's very important to me.
What do you mean? So we haven't talked about race, and I want the audience to know that we only have about 45, 50 minutes, and race is a constant issue in our family. We talk about it all the time, so I don't want people to think we're ignoring that. So maybe we'll finish with that. How big an issue, if at all, is race in your mostly white school? But it's not totally white.
I think it's a huge issue. So when the
No.
year I came to my
Wait. In your school today, race is a
yeah,
huge issue.
yes.
Okay, go.
So when I came to my school about 4 years ago, there was an Instagram account made that was also made for other private schools called Black at Paideia, where Black students from different graduating classes from the past, since the school was created actually, but especially modern times, were talking about their experiences. And I'm also part of my school's Student Diversity Leadership Initiative, where we do a lot of work on focusing on anti-racism in our community. And I have heard so many stories of racism in class selection. A lot of times the classes that students are recommended for, they see a pretty clear race disparity where a Black student and a white student with the same grade in the class will get different recommendations. That I've heard that happen a lot. I think especially Black women in my community experience a lot. I think that socially there's racism. I've noticed a lot of segregation by friend group. And I think that it is a really big issue even in my progressive private school.
And progressive private school in one of the most progressive cities in America that has had Black leadership since 1976 and is the only city in America that didn't, Atlanta, the only city in America that did not burn, major city that did not burn in the 60s because the Black middle class here is very strong. And yet, race is still an issue in this progressive private school, which of course I knew before I asked the question, but I think it's interesting for the audience to hear that. One can only imagine how much of an issue it is outside of progressive schools in one of the most progressive cities, especially when it comes to race and kind of the seat of the civil rights movement as well. How big an issue do you think racism is in America generally today?
In America,
Yeah.
huge. I mean, look at police brutality, look at the implications of the institution of slavery are still very much present. And I actually recently read Caste by Isabel Wilkerson, which I think is kind of explains race in America in a nutshell. I totally recommend it for anybody listening. I think that race is one of the biggest issues in America today.
Do you have a prediction, Trump or Biden?
I think Trump's going to win.
Okay, that took the wind out of my sails.
Sorry.
And how much of a disaster do you think that's going to be?
um,
By the way, that's a classic. By the way, for the audience, Sarah wants to be a lawyer. I just asked a very leading question. How much of a disaster do you think that's going to be? Which assumes it's going to be a disaster in any way, shape, or form. I asked you a leading question, but I did that because I know what Sarah's answer is. Go ahead.
Disastrous, horrible for the country. I think it's going to impact every aspect of our political and social system. I think that Trump winning is the worst thing that could possibly happen for America in the next year.
Trump is the worst thing that could possibly happen to America is how we are going to end this particular podcast. Sarah, I love you. Thank you for coming on. I hope and I think the audience will really enjoy your appearance here. And maybe we'll do a part 2 in a couple of years and catch up if I'm still doing this podcast. Thanks for being here.
Love you, Dad.
Love you too.